When the Galactic Council ordered humanity's extinction, they expected surrender. Instead, they got a species willing to break the laws of physics itself rather than bow to alien overlords. The Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council stretched across 17 kilometers of polished obsidian, its crystalline ceiling reaching toward the artificial star that provided perpetual daylight to Station Omega-7. Representatives from 437 species filled the amphitheater-style seating, their varied forms creating a tapestry of colors, shapes, and sizes that would have amazed any human observer. But today, the humans present were not amazed, they were angry. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood at the center podium, her simple black diplomatic suit a stark contrast to the elaborate ceremonial garments worn by the other delegates. Her graying hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her dark eyes held a coldness that made even the reptilian Star representatives shift uncomfortably in their heated seats. Behind her, the other members of Earth's diplomatic corps maintained perfect military bearing, though their clenched fists told another story. High Chancellor Zephyrinth of the Altarian hegemony rose from his elevated throne, his forearms gesturing in what his species considered diplomatic courtesy. His translucent blue skin shimmered as he spoke, the universal translator rendering his crystalline voice into crisp English. Ambassador Vasquez, the Council has reached its final decision regarding Sector 7 Alpha, colloquially known to your species as the Sol system. Elena's jaw tightened imperceptibly. She had known this moment would come, but the reality of it still hit like a physical blow. Around the chamber, she could see the satisfied expressions on too many alien faces. The Korath Dominance representatives were practically vibrating with anticipation, their chitinous exoskeletons clicking against their seats. The ethereal Luminari delegation floated higher in their containment fields, their energy forms pulsing with what she had learned to recognize as smugness. The mineral wealth of your system's asteroid belt and outer planets has been deemed crucial to the ongoing war effort against the Void Plague, Chancellor Zephyrinth continued, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. Furthermore, your species' homeworld occupies a strategically vital position along the Kepler vegan trade route. The Council has therefore voted, by a margin of 412 to 25, to relocate humanity to the Kepler 440 system. A murmur rippled through the chamber, though Elena noticed it wasn't one of surprise. This had been decided long before today's session. The vote was merely a formality, a thin veneer of legitimacy painted over what amounted to armed robbery on a galactic scale. Kepler 440 is a suitable world, the Chancellor pressed on, apparently oblivious to the way Elena's hands had begun to tremble with suppressed rage. Slightly larger than your Earth, with acceptable atmospheric composition and gravity within tolerable parameters for your physiology. The Council, in its generosity, will provide transportation for up to 6 billion of your people. The remainder. He paused, his alien features impossible to read but his meaning crystal clear. Elena found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. And if we refuse? The chamber fell silent. In 3 centuries of galactic civilization, no species had ever refused a council relocation order. It simply wasn't done, the council spoke, and lesser civilizations obeyed. That was the natural order of things. Chancellor Zephyrinth asked, for eyes fixed on her with something that might have been pity. Ambassador, your species controls exactly one star system. The council represents civilizations spanning half the galaxy. We have fleets that could glass 1,000 worlds, weapons that can ignite stars, technology your people can barely comprehend. Refusal is not an option, it is suicide. Then we choose suicide. The words left Elena's mouth before she fully realized she was speaking them. The silence that followed was so complete she could hear the artificial atmosphere recyclers humming. In the walls, 437 alien species stared at her in shock, disbelief, and, in some cases, what might have been the first stirrings of fear. Admiral Saracen stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, humanity's first and only dreadnought-class starship. Through the massive view screen, She could see the scattered lights of the Sol defense fleet, every ship humanity had ever built. From ancient fusion drive cargo haulers pressed into military service to the cutting-edge destroyer squadrons that represented the pinnacle of human technology. 234 vessels in total, facing down a Galactic Council enforcement fleet of over 3,000 ships. The mathematics were absurd. It should have been a slaughter that lasted minutes, not hours, but that was before the Council learned what desperation could do to a species that had clawed its way up from a gravity well through sheer bloody-minded determination. Admiral, called Lieutenant Commander Park from the communication station, were receiving another surrender demand from the Council fleet. This one's from Grand Admiral Deckmer himself. Sarah didn't turn away from the tactical display. Red dots representing Council ships surrounded the inner system in a sphere formation, while the smaller cluster of blue dots that represented humanity's defenders held position near Mars' orbit. Put him through. The view screen flickered, and suddenly, Sarah was looking at the bridge of a Korath battle carrier. Grand Admiral Deckmer was an impressive specimen even by his species standards, 3 meters tall, covered in jet black chitin that reflected the bridge lighting, with 4 arms that ended in razor-sharp claws. Behind him, Sarah could see dozens of his crew working at stations, their movements precise and disciplined. This was a professional military force with thousands of years of experience. Admiral Chen, Deckmer's voice came through the translator with a buzzing undertone that betrayed his arthropod origins. I have fought in 17 campaigns across for spiral arms. I have seen species fight with valor, with cunning, even with berserker rage, but I have never seen anything quite so foolish as what your people are attempting. Sarah allowed herself a thin smile. We've been called foolish before, Admiral. Usually right before we do something everyone said was impossible. This is not one of your historical wars, human. This is not your American Revolution or your World War II. You face the might of civilizations that were building starships when your ancestors were discovering fire. Surrender now, and at least some of your people will live. You know what, Admiral? You're absolutely right. Sarah's smile widened, and something in her expression made the alien warrior's mandibles click uneasily. This isn't like our historical wars. In those wars, we were fighting other humans. We were fighting beings who shared our basic psychology, our limitations, our assumptions about how warfare works. She leaned forward in her captain's chair, her eyes never leaving Deckmer's alien features. But you're different. You've never faced anything like us, because there's never been anything like us in your galaxy. You've spent thousands of years fighting civilized wars between civilized species who follow civilized rules. You negotiate. You posture. You make calculated moves on grand strategic boards. The tactical display updated, showing new red contacts dropping out of hyperspace near Jupiter. Sarah glanced at it and nodded to herself. Right on schedule. Here's what you don't understand about humans. Admiral, we don't fight civilized wars. We fight total wars. When we decide to fight, we don't just commit our militaries, we commit our entire species. Every man, woman, and child becomes part of the war effort. We don't just fight with our ships and weapons, we fight with our economics, our industry, our culture, even our biology. Deckmer's compound eyes narrowed. Your bravado will not change the tactical situation, Admiral Chen. You are outnumbered 15-1. You're right, we are outnumbered, but you're thinking like a civilized species again. You're thinking in terms of fleets and formations and proper military doctrine. You're thinking about this like a battle. Sarah stood up from her chair and walked closer to the view screen, her image no doubt filling Deckmer's display. This isn't a battle, Admiral. This is an extermination attempt. And humans have a very long memory when it comes to extinction events. Dr. James Wright had been working for 72 hours straight, sustained by stimulants and the kind of manic energy that came from knowing that failure meant the death of his species. The laboratory beneath Luna's surface hummed with activity. As teams of scientists made final adjustments to humanity's most desperate gambit, quantum cascade resonance is holding steady, called out Dr. Patel from across the room. Gravitational field generators are online and synchronized. Temporal field is stabilized, added Dr. Kim, her fingers flying over holographic controls. We're getting some exotic matter fluctuations, but nothing outside acceptable parameters. James nodded grimly. Acceptable parameters. They were about to attempt something that violated at least 6 fundamental laws of physics as they understood them, using technology reverse-engineered from captured alien ships and powered by reactions that existed at the very edge of human theoretical knowledge. But it had to work, because if it didn't, there wouldn't be any humans left to learn from the failure. Above them, he knew, the battle was already beginning. Admiral Chen was buying them time with tactics that would have made Sun Tzu weep with pride, and Napoleon nod with approval. The Council fleet was finding out what happened when you tried to fight an enemy that treated physics as a suggestion rather than a law, and military doctrine as something to be ignored entirely. Humanity's ships were diving through impossible vectors, using gravitational slingshots around planets to achieve accelerations that should have liquefied their crews. They were ramming Council vessels with converted cargo ships loaded with antimatter, turning merchant vessels into kinetic kill vehicles, and generally fighting in ways that violated every civilized norm of space combat. But it was still a delaying action. For all their creativity and desperation, the humans were losing. Ships were dying, good people were dying, and eventually the math would catch up with them. Unless James and his team could make their impossible weapon work. Initiate STARTUP sequence, he called out, his voice steadier than he felt. Around the laboratory, a dozen different systems came online, with sounds ranging from mechanical hums to exotic energy discharges that made his teeth ache. The quantum cascade weapon was humanity's answer to the Council's overwhelming technological superiority. Instead of trying to match their enemy ship for ship or weapon for weapon, human scientists had taken a different approach. They had looked at the fundamental forces that held matter together and asked a very simple question. What if we could make them stop working? The theory was elegant in its simplicity. Every civilization in the galaxy used technology based on the same underlying physics. Fusion reactors, antimatter containment, force fields, faster-than-light drives, all of it depended on the strong nuclear force, the weak nuclear force, and electromagnetic interactions functioning in predictable ways. But quantum mechanics suggested that these forces weren't truly constant. They were probability fields, maintained by the observation and interaction of conscious minds with the universe around them. Change the observation parameters on a large enough scale, and you could theoretically alter the fundamental constants themselves. It should have been impossible. The energy requirements alone should have been insurmountable, but humans had one advantage that no other species in the galaxy possessed. They were crazy enough to try it anyway. Field strength is approaching critical threshold, Dr. Patel reported, sweat beading on his forehead despite the laboratory's climate control. Exotic matter containment is holding, but I'm seeing some resonance patterns that don't match our simulations. James nodded grimly. They were in uncharted territory now, building a weapon that existed more in theoretical mathematics than in physical reality. But the mathematics were sound, even if the engineering was held together with determination and prayer. Commence final sequence, he ordered. Grand Admiral Deckmer watched his tactical display with growing disbelief as another one of his battle cruisers simply stopped. Not destroyed, not disabled, stopped. The kilometer-long vessel hung motionless in space, its fusion reactors offline, its weapon systems dead, its crew frantically working at controls that no longer responded to their commands. It was the 7th ship in the last 10 minutes. Ships that had been functioning perfectly suddenly found their technology failing in ways that defied explanation. Reactors went cold despite having full fuel supplies. Antimatter containment fields collapsed safely instead of explosively. Even basic Electronics were failing, as if the fundamental forces that made them work were simply going away. Admiral, his tactical officer's voice carried an undertone of panic that Thekmer had never heard from a veteran Korath warrior. I'm reading massive quantum fluctuations throughout the system. Something is destabilizing the local space-time matrix. Thekmer's mandibles clicked in agitation. Impossible. Such technology would require energy output equivalent to a stellar collapse. The humans don't possess ... He trailed off as the implications hit him. The humans didn't possess such technology using conventional methods, but humans had already demonstrated a disturbing tendency to achieve impossible results through sheer bloody-minded refusal to accept that something couldn't be done. Get me Admiral Chen. Now. The communications system took longer than usual to establish the connection, and when Admiral Chen's image appeared on the screen, Thekmer could see the exhaustion in her features. Her uniform was rumpled, her hair had escaped its regulation bun, and there was something in her eyes that made the veteran alien warriors kite and crawl. Having technical difficulties, Admiral Chen asked, her voice carrying a note of grim satisfaction. What are you doing to our ships? Thekmer demanded. What weapon are you using? Chen leaned back in her chair, and for a moment she looked less like a military officer and more like a predator that had finally cornered its prey. It's not really a weapon, Admiral. It's more like an adjustment. You see, we did some research on your technology after we captured some of your ships a few years back. Very impressive stuff. Fusion reactors that can burn for centuries, antimatter, containment fields that never fail, force fields that can stop relativistic projectiles. She paused, apparently gathering her thoughts. But here's the thing about impressive technology, it's all based on the same underlying physics, the same fundamental constants, the strong nuclear force that holds atomic nuclei together, the electromagnetic force that makes your circuits work, the quantum field fluctuations that make your faster-than-light drives possible. Thekmer felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature on his bridge. You cannot alter fundamental constants. Such technology would destabilize matter itself. You're right. We can't alter them everywhere, but we can alter them locally, in a specific region of space. Say, around a particular star system. Chen's smile was the coldest thing Thekmer had ever seen. We've created a quantum cascade field that changes the probability distributions of fundamental particle interactions. Your technology stops working because the universe it was designed for doesn't exist here anymore. The tactical display showed another council ship going dark. Then another. The cascade effect was spreading, rippling outward from the inner system, like a wave of technological death. This is insane, Thekmer whispered. You're risking the destruction of your entire star system. If your calculations are wrong, if the cascade spreads beyond your control ... then we die. Chen's voice was matter of fact, but we die free, and we take you with us. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened 18 hours after the Sol incident, as the historians would later call it. Representatives from across the galaxy had gathered via quantum entanglement communication, their various forms of alien confusion and outrage filling the virtual chamber with a cacophony of untranslatable emotions. High Chancellor Zephyrinth materialized at the center of the assembly, his usually pristine appearance disheveled and his forearms gesturing in patterns that conveyed extreme agitation. The enforcement fleet has been completely neutralized, he announced without preamble. 3,000 ships of the line, representing the combined might of 17 different civilizations, have been rendered inoperative by a localized alteration of physical constants within the Sol system. The chamber erupted in a babble of alien voices, all demanding explanations, accusations, and immediate action. The Chancellor raised all forearms for silence, and gradually the chaos subsided. The humans have demonstrated a weapon unlike anything in recorded galactic history, he continued. They have somehow managed to create a localized field that alters the fundamental forces of physics. Within approximately a light-hour radius of their star, conventional technology simply ceases to function. Senator Vracht of the hegemony stood, his massive crystalline form catching the chamber's lighting and refracting it into prismatic patterns. Then we deploy unconventional weapons, kinetic bombardment from outside the field, relativistic projectiles, stellar engineering if necessary, and risk destabilizing their entire system. Chancellor Zephyrinth's voice carried a note of fear that few had ever heard from the usually composed Altarian. Their weapon appears to be powered by tapping directly into quantum vacuum fluctuations. If it goes critical, the cascade effect could spread to neighboring systems, possibly beyond. The implications of that statement hung in the virtual air like a poisonous cloud. A cascade failure that spread beyond Sol could theoretically destabilize vast regions of space, rendering them uninhabitable not just for biological life but for the technology-dependent civilizations that dominated the galaxy. Ambassador Tlani of the Pacifist Coalition spoke next, her melodious voice carrying across the chamber with the weight of centuries of diplomatic experience. Perhaps it is time to reconsider our approach to the human problem. They have demonstrated capabilities that we clearly underestimated. A negotiated settlement might be ... double quotes negotiated settlement. The interruption came from war leader Gorth, of the militant faction, his cybernetic implants glowing red with rage. They have committed an act of war against the entire council. They have threatened the stability of the galaxy itself. We cannot negotiate with terrorists and madmen. And yet, came a new voice from the chamber's periphery. They seemed to be quite sane from their perspective. All eyes turned to the speaker, Dr. Zenhai, the council's chief xenopsychologist and one of the few beings in the galaxy who had made a serious study of human behavior patterns. The elderly Kepler vegan floated in her mobility chair, her bioluminescent patches pulsing in patterns that indicated deep thought. I have been studying the human response to our relocation order, she continued, and I believe we have made a fundamental error in our assessment of their species' psychology. We assumed they would respond like any rational civilization, weighing costs and benefits, seeking the path of least resistance, accepting the inevitable when faced with overwhelming force. She paused, her patches shifting to a pattern that conveyed profound unease. But humans are not rational in the way we understand the term. They are an apex predator species that evolved under constant existential threat. Their entire cultural development has been shaped by a willingness to die rather than submit to extinction. What we see as madness, they see as the only sane response to an extinction threat. War leader Gorth's cybernetics sparked with fury. Then we eliminate them completely, deploy the Nova protocols, turn their star into a supernova and end this threat once and for all. With what? Dr. Zenhai asked quietly. The Nova protocols require stellar engineering equipment that operates on the same physical principles as every other piece of technology. In our civilization, technology that ceases to function within their quantum cascade field. To deploy such weapons, we would need to get close enough to their system to be affected by their field. The silence that followed was profound. For the first time in galactic history, a single species had managed to make themselves effectively invulnerable through sheer technological audacity and a willingness to risk mutual annihilation. Chancellor Zephyrinth finally spoke, his voice heavy with the weight of reality. Dr. Zenhai, what do you recommend? The xenopsychologist's patches shifted to patterns of deep consideration. We adapt, we learn, and we acknowledge that the galaxy has changed. The humans have demonstrated that conventional approaches to interspecies relations may not apply to all species. They have, in effect, seceded from galactic civilization. That sets a dangerous precedent, Senator Vracht objected. If every primitive species believes they can resist council authority through desperate measures ... then perhaps, Dr. Zenhai replied, the council needs to reconsider what authority means in a galaxy where any sufficiently desperate species can threaten the stability of local spacetime. 1 year after the Sol incident, Ambassador Elena, Vasquez stood in the observation deck of the newly constructed Humanity House, Earth's embassy to the Galactic Council. Through the transparent aluminum windows, she could see the familiar blue-green marble of her homeworld, surrounded by the strange aurora effects that had become a permanent feature of the Sol system since the activation of the quantum cascade. The field had stabilized. Thankfully, Dr. Wright and his team had learned to control and modulate it, creating zones where conventional technology could function alongside areas where the fundamental constants remained altered. It was delicate work, requiring constant monitoring and adjustment, but it was possible. Sol had become a hybrid system, part normal space, part engineered reality. The political implications had been staggering. Humanity had effectively declared independence from galactic civilization, and they had the firepower to make it stick. But independence, Elena had learned, was not the same as isolation. The Altarian delegation has arrived, announced her aide, Lieutenant Sarah Park. The young woman had adapted well to her new role in humanity's first truly independent diplomatic corps. Elena nodded and smoothed her diplomatic uniform. No longer the standard council-approved design, but something distinctly human, dark blue with silver trim, carrying the symbols of Earth and the United Nations alongside newer emblems representing humanity's expanding presence in the Sol system. The delegation that entered the embassy's main conference room was small but significant. Chancellor Zephyrinth himself led it, accompanied by two other Altarians and what Elena recognized as a Kepler vegans and a psychologist, probably Dr. Zenhai, whose reports on human psychology had become required reading throughout Council space. Ambassador Vasquez, Chancellor Zephyrinth said, offering the four-armed Altarian equivalent of a bow. I bring greetings from the Galactic Council and a proposal for new arrangements. Elena gestured to the conference table, noting with satisfaction that her staff had prepared it with seating appropriate for multiple alien physiologies. Humanity was learning to be independent, but they weren't learning to be rude. Chancellor, Dr. Zenhai. She nodded to each in turn. I'm pleased to see you, though I admit I'm curious about what new arrangements might involve. Zephyrinth settled into his custom chair, his forearms arranging themselves in patterns that Elena had learned to recognize as diplomatic formality mixed with genuine nervousness. The Council has spent the past year reassessing our policies regarding species that demonstrate unusual technological capabilities and psychological profiles. Elena allowed herself a small smile. I imagine we've provided quite a case study. Indeed, Dr. Zenhai leaned forward, her bioluminescent patches pulsing, and what Elena had learned indicated intense interest. Your species has fundamentally altered our understanding of how civilizations can interact with galactic society. The Sol incident has forced us to acknowledge that our traditional models of diplomatic engagement may not apply universally. What the good doctor is diplomatically avoiding saying, Chancellor Zephyrinth interjected, is that you have scared the collective consciousness out of most of the galaxy. A species willing to risk universal destruction rather than accept relocation is unprecedented. Elena nodded thoughtfully. She had expected this conversation eventually. Humanity's dramatic gesture had bought them independence, but independence without trade, communication, or technological exchange was just another form of prison. So, what are you proposing? She asked. Zephyrinth's forearms gestured in complex patterns that Elena's cultural briefings had taught her indicated formal proposal submission. The Council proposes recognition of the Sol system as an autonomous zone with special status. You would retain complete internal sovereignty, including the right to maintain your unusual defensive capabilities. In exchange, you would agree to limited participation in galactic affairs, trade relationships, cultural exchange, and consultation on matters that might affect galactic stability and the areas we wish to expand into. Elena asked, the asteroid mining operations in nearby systems. The colony proposals we had submitted before the incident. Doctors and high-S patches shifted to patterns indicating careful consideration. That would be subject to negotiation on a case-by-case basis. The Council is willing to consider human expansion requests, provided they are accompanied by appropriate assurances regarding the deployment of cascade field technology. Elena leaned back in her chair, her mind racing through the implications. It wasn't everything humanity had wanted, but it was more than they had dared hope for: recognition, autonomy, the right to exist on their own terms. "I'll need to consult with my government," she said finally, "but I believe this proposal has merit. Though I should warn you, humanity has learned some lessons from this experience. We will never again allow ourselves to be placed in a position where our survival depends on the goodwill of others." Chancellor Zephyrinth's alien features somehow managed to convey rueful understanding. "Ambassador, after what we witnessed in the Sol system, I doubt any species in the galaxy will attempt to place humanity in such a position again." Dr. James Wright stood in the primary control chamber of the Quantum Cascade facility, now expanded into a complex that stretched across Luna's southern hemisphere. Banks of monitoring equipment tracked the field's parameters in real time, while teams of scientists and engineers from across human space worked to refine and improve the technology that had bought their species its freedom. Through the chamber's observation windows, he could see Earth hanging in the star-filled sky, its familiar continents and oceans unchanged despite everything that had happened. But the aurora effects that danced around the planet told a different story, the story of a species that had looked extinction in the face and refused to blink. Dr. Wright called his assistant, Dr. Chen, were receiving a priority communication from the Centauri expedition. James nodded and activated the quantum entanglement communicator. After a moment, the image of Captain Rodriguez appeared on the screen, her face showing the mixture of exhaustion and excitement that came with successful exploration. "Dr. Wright," she said, "I'm happy to report that the Proxima Centauri system is clear of Council forces and suitable for colonization. The local space appears stable, and our cascade field generators are functioning normally." James smiled. "Humanity's first interstellar colony, established not through Council permission, but through their own determination and technology. It was a good beginning. Excellent work, Captain. Prepare for the arrival of the first colonist ships, and Captain, make sure the cascade field generators are fully operational before any civilian vessels enter the system." "Understood, Doctor. We won't be caught vulnerable again." James closed the communication and turned back to his monitoring stations. The cascade field around Sol continued to function perfectly, maintaining the altered physical constants that made conventional alien technology inoperative while allowing human-designed systems to function normally. It was delicate work, requiring constant attention and adjustment, but it was manageable. More importantly, it was expandable. Each new human colony would have its own cascade field, creating islands of altered physics where humanity could exist and thrive without fear of alien interference. It wasn't the galaxy they had dreamed of joining as equals, but it was the galaxy they had claimed for themselves. On his desk, a message waited from the Galactic Council: another trade proposal, another cultural exchange program, another attempt to slowly integrate humanity back into galactic civilization. James would read it eventually, and probably forward it to the appropriate diplomatic channels. But right now, he had more important work to do. Humanity had learned to change the rules of physics itself to ensure their survival. Now they were learning to change the rules of galactic civilization to ensure their future. And if the galaxy didn't like those new rules, well, James looked out at the aurora-wreathed Earth and smiled grimly. The galaxy would learn to adapt, just as humanity always had. After all, they had all the time in the universe, and they had proven they were willing to end that universe rather than surrender their freedom. In the end, that had made all the difference. This HFY story explores themes of human determination, technological innovation, and the willingness to risk everything for freedom. It showcases humanity's refusal to accept defeat and their ability to find unconventional solutions to impossible problems, classic elements of the HFY genre that resonate with audiences who appreciate stories of human resilience and ingenuity.